Ferrari had an embarrassing outing at the Hungarian Grand Prix, but perhaps not for the reasons you've been made to believe. Following the race in which Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz finished 4th and 6th respectively, pundits put the whole blame on the team's poor strategy, with Ferrari's team boss Mattia Binotto coming under heavy criticism. But as we know in Formula One, things are sometimes not always the way they seem to be. With this in mind, we've carefully analysed Ferrari's performance in that race and discovered that the team was always bound to underperform, even without the strategy issues. But why is this the case? Let's find out. Mattia Binotto was the scapegoat for Ferrari's poor performance at the Hungarian Grand Prix. However, we believe that most of the criticism he received are not based on the performance in Hungary alone. The outburst is basically a reaction to all of the mistakes made by Ferrari in the previous races. So the buzz around it is quite understandable, especially because their poor display on the day saw Charles Leclerc fall 80 points behind championship leader Max Verstappen. But looking at it from another perspective, some of the criticism Binotto received was a bit unfair, and perhaps the media wouldn't have criticised his decisions as much as they did if the earlier mistakes didn't happen. A lot of the criticism has been centred around Ferrari's decision to switch Charles Leclerc from medium to hard tyres halfway into the race. The intention was clearly to gain an advantage over the rest of the grid. But it's rather unfortunate that Leclerc was unable to get the best out of the tyres. Ferrari eventually accepted that the move was a wrong one, and Leclerc's medium tyres were restored, but it was too late. Before he was switched to hard tyres, Leclerc was literally flying through track and consistently lapping quicker than Max Verstappen. Metrics shows that the average lap time lost between the hard and medium tyres over the first 15 laps when Leclerc had them on was less than a second. In fact, on some occasions during the race, Leclerc was lapping well over 1 second slower than Verstappen, even though the latter posed quicker times during the race practice session earlier that weekend. Ferrari clearly had the fastest car on the grid in Hungary, but somehow things just didn't work out for the prancing horse brand, and we believe that the weather played a role in all of this. For instance, the temperature levels during the setup on Friday were completely different from what we witnessed during the race on Sunday, and that is one factor that most likely affected the car's performance. Sometimes the efficiency of the F1 75 is complicated by the way it was engineered. This is because the car is extremely thermally sensitive, which means the tyre grip is usually compromised when the air temperature is lower. This is exactly why drivers weave from one end to another during formation laps and when they're behind the safety cars. One ancient rule of thumb in Formula One is that drivers need to warm up their tyres to get the best of them, and the F1 75 isn't any different. When the temperature levels are low, the car is unable to work its tyres as much as required because the suspension takes on much of the stress. This leaves the contact area cold and ultimately translates to a weak grip and traction. Overall, though, the Ferrari F1 75 is perhaps the most efficient car on the grid in terms of aerodynamics, especially with its incredible downforce and the special design of the suspension, which absorbs curbs and the track's surface camber to keep the car close to the ground as much as possible. However, this also means that with more flexible and aero-efficient suspension setup, there's less lateral stress and vertical load on the tyres around the corner. As a result, the tyres don't suffer as much stress during extended races when the temperature is low. And that's exactly what played out in Hungary on Saturday and Sunday. In that instance, the lack of stress left the tyre tread cold, and this made it difficult to get them to the required temperature that's needed to achieve a decent grip. Interestingly, Charles Leclerc detected this problem early and issued a warning to the team after the qualifying race on Saturday. But perhaps they didn't pay enough attention to it. Speaking at a media session after the qualifying round, Leclerc described his struggle with the car and the tyre. "Today, it's not been a great day," the Monegasque said. "I've been struggling massively with the tyres and just had a lot of inconsistency to put the gore into the right window with those conditions. I struggled to put a lap together, but we'll look into it." Going into the race proper on Sunday, optimism remained high for both Ferrari drivers despite their poor showing during qualifying. The team believed that they'll gather enough pace over the longer race stint to nick a podium finish. And that thinking was not bad at all because drivers have a better opportunity to heat up their tyres during races than in qualifying. However, The long stint pace Ferrari were expecting to have on Sunday never appeared, all thanks to the drop in temperature. Ferrari's second driver, Carlos Sainz, admitted that the weather contributed to the team's poor performance during the race. "We clearly struggled as a team today," Sainz told Sky Sports F1. "I'm a bit puzzled because we expected to have very good race pace coming from Friday, but it's clear that with these lower temperatures and track condition changes that we had today, there was something going on with the car and the tyres that we just were not fast." Something to analyse, a day to probably look back, regroup and see what we did wrong for these kind of conditions, and come back after the summer break with a better package. Ferrari's team boss Mattia Binotto agreed with Carlos Sainz's assessment of the race as the media asked him questions about the poor strategy issues that we saw from the team. But deep down in his heart, he knew well enough that his team had lost the race even before it began because of the mechanical problems with the car and its inability to charge up the tyres under a cold climate. That means even if Ferrari had made all the right calls on the day, it was always going to be impossible to finish ahead of Max Verstappen, especially with the form that the Red Bull driver has shown this season. In fairness to Mattia Binotto, he gave hints in his interview, but the media and critics overlooked it and instead chose to criticise the team's poor strategy. The car today was not working as expected, and we didn't have the speed we were hoping for, looking back at the pace that we had on the race simulation on Friday, Binotto said. Today was certainly different conditions, a lot cooler, but overall the speed today was not great enough. And whatever tyres we were using, I don't think that we were as good as we were looking for and hoping for. From all of these interviews, it's clear that the entire Ferrari team knew well enough that it was always going to be difficult to get anything out of the race. Maybe the poor strategy calls worsened the situation, but it was clear that the cold weather had put them at a disadvantage even before the lights went out. But in the end, it might just have been a blessing in disguise for the team. At least they know now that the F175 gets the better out of its tyres when the weather is hot. They also know the constraints that are involved when driving the car in wet conditions, and they can make the required adjustments. For instance, when faced with the type of climate we witnessed in Hungary, the team can easily make changes to the suspension to ensure that the car is able to work the tyres a lot better. There's a possibility that it might hurt the overall performance of the car, but they certainly can find a balance. In fact, we suspect that Ferrari engineers would have worked overtime during the mid-season break to fix these issues and ensure that their drivers are not left out in the cold in the upcoming races.